if you have an enemy on your border with genocidal intention and ambition, you can't play that game, right? That enemy needs to be eliminated as much as possible, degrade as much as possible, whatever term you want to use, but you cannot allow that situation to exist. And I mean, everyone's very hyper-focused on Hamas and in Gaza. We abandoned, let's think about this for a moment, those kibbutzim in the south, that they had to live like that. We abandoned.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Yakov Katz. It's wonderful to have you.
You're one of my favorite people, Yakov, I have to say. And amongst your many credentials and the many wonderful things in your bio, you're now with the JPPI, where I used to be a fellow, excellent institution, and you have an excellent podcast there that we encourage people to check out. I always find myself, I have been on your show, and I was very glad to talk about the last publication I had at JPPI before I left there. And you're one of those writers in Israel where I read your posts, your columns, and I say, "Oh, yep, that's how I wish I would have said it." So it's really nice to have you on the show. You're always a balanced voice. You're always a nuanced voice, talking about certainly Middle East affairs, but in the case of today's show, kind of doing our very first deep dive into Israel, Israeli society, Israeli politics, as we're at a very pivotal moment for the country that I'm recording from and that you're recording from as well.
It's great to be with both of you, and let me just congratulate you on founding ME24 and wish you just the best of luck. I think it's a much needed platform to bring a diverse group of people together.
Right. There's the other element that we deal with, when you follow actual Middle Eastern media, is that you have the one problem, like you said, of the kind of foreign correspondent who doesn't really know the place like they should. The second one is when we're talking about Arab world media or the people who are given platforms on Western media about the Middle East, they've kind of duped the West. And, we have Islamists, you have radicals, you have people who do not represent authentic voices from the Middle East who are over platformed, and people in the West who increasingly think and have been led to think by outlets like Al Jazeera that these are mainstream normative voices coming from the Middle East, when people in the Middle East, really don't agree with those voices.
It's definitely a shift, right? There's a major shift, and it's not being picked up at all. It's the opposite that's happening. You're only hearing the radicalized voices, the Al Jazeera, kind of the ideological narrative voices, and they're becoming the most powerful tool, basically, and the so-called voice of the Middle East, which is not the voice of the Middle East, it's the voice of the Muslim Brotherhood, uh, you know, supporting elements of the Middle East.
Where the extreme polar sides are the ones that stand out, and very often, unfortunately, complexity and nuance is something that is because what it does, Hyvie, is it makes you have to think, right? So if I give you something that's just an extreme kind of position, it's black and white terms, and then it's just easy to digest. So it's I naturally gravitate to that. Whatever, if I'm far, if I'm on the right, I'll gravitate far right. If I'm kind of instinctively on the left, maybe I'll gravitate towards the far left. But it's that center that tries to bring the complexity, which is just much more hard, because then you have to use a muscle that's called your brain, and you have to think. And sometimes that hurts, and it's hard to do, and people just don't want to do it. So, yeah, that's the sad reality we live in.
That's true. And makes you stand out, makes you like outside of the herd, and makes you maybe get like some backlashes on social media because it's not the popular thing to be right now. So it's a scary place. But that's why Middle East 24 is here, because we want people to know that it is nuanced, it is complex, and you just need to understand, the complexity of it.
Yeah, but I've long believed, Dan, and that I recently wrote a piece that I got attacked by people on the left, and then people in Bibi's office were writing to me, and I said, you know what? This means I did something right. If everybody's attacking me from all sides of the spectrum, I must be doing something okay. And that's long been kind of my moral compass to some extent, is just always be true to yourself and be true to the story, but never pick a side too much, right? And tell it with try to bring out the complexity of the situation. It keeps it fun.
Absolutely. So speaking of bringing complexity to the issue, you recently published a book, While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East. It's a national bestseller in the U.S. And, this is something that we've talked about on the show. It's something I certainly talk about a lot in lectures that I give, that we're supposed to be the most powerful military, the most powerful intelligence service in this region. And we know we actually had the intelligence even that Hamas was planning such a thing. But give the give you the chance here to talk about your book, and we recommend our listeners look at it. We'll put it in the show notes. But what is the kind of the elevator pitch? What's the kind of bottom line of this book this very timely book that you put out?
Well, I mean, look, like everyone, I think around the world, and definitely in the state of Israel, I was just as puzzled and mystified by how could this happen. And, stuff started to come out very quickly about what went wrong, and was there intelligence? Was there not intelligence? Were there warnings? Were there not warnings? What happened on that fateful night between October 6th and October 7th? The flurry of phone calls and activities and debates and conversations, all good. But this was obviously something that was much bigger, right? It was something that really spoke to a mistake that Israelis are familiar with from the term the conceptia, or the paradigm, the concept of the Yom Kippur War in 1973, when we believed as a country and as intelligence agencies that the Syrians and the Egyptians would never want to go to war again, and they did, and that was a very painful war because of just how many soldiers were lost in those initial days. But this understanding that October 7th wasn't just something that was born in the 24, 36 hours before. This spoke to something deeper of how Israel views its threats, how it viewed particularly Hamas, how it creates and formulates a national defense doctrine. And this policy of containment, which is now everyone knows that term, but before October 7th, not many people did. But that was the prevailing assessment, and the policy of the Israeli government from the top all the way down on all fronts, by the way, right? Hezbollah and Hamas and the West Bank, keep things under a lid. Don't ever let it boil over. And if it does, you play a game of whack-a-mole. They pop their heads up too high. We hit them, they hit us, and then we kind of kick the can down the road for a couple of years. And I wanted to understand, and Amir Buchbut, my co-author, and I, we wanted to understand where did this come from? How does it happen? How does a policy like this is it born? Is it cultivated? And how does it become entrenched as policy? And how do we prevent this from happening again? And that's something that I feel, so we kind of tried to tell that as a story, but there's still so much reckoning that's required in this country, that we need a state commission of inquiry, in my view, and sadly, we don't yet have one.
Like to say something about my own observation, being somebody who visited the borders with Gaza before October 7th. And I was like, I saw the posts of like Hamas literally right there across the border. I'm like, oh my God, there's those little towers where like Hamas members are there. And I'm like, wow, like Israel is really putting up with like having them right there, like. And then I was seeing like some of the Gazans who were going into Israel to work. And my understanding at that time was that, you know, Gaza is a very heavily populated area. Hamas has already infiltrated every so-called international organization, every hospital, every even media, okay, office. We have their rockets everywhere. They're military everywhere. And Israel basically recognized the major human price that any operation to actually take out Hamas will mean for the people in Gaza. And that was just a decision not to, go ahead and do it. And it was just like, okay, let's tolerate their existence. I think this is the containment policy that you're referring to, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, it's this idea. I'll give you an example. I was talking about this just the other day with somebody, with a senior intelligence officer in the IDF. Is that the thing that what struck me, but it didn't all come together, right? Sometimes you don't put all the pieces together. But there was on the Lebanese front a few years ago. It was like 2019, and there was or maybe it was 2020, but whatever. There was something with it with Hezbollah. We had a bit of a clash with them. We attacked. We killed some people. I think it was in Syria, and they were going to retaliate. and we knew they were going to retaliate along the border with Lebanon. So what did Israel do? It kind of parked a fake convoy. It evacuated all the bases. You remember this, Dan? And then they fired an anti-tank missile. They hit this jeep that was completely empty, but then they helicoptered soldiers who looked like they had ketchup on, looked like they had blood, but it turned out to be ketchup on them. And they bandages to Rambam Hospital in Haifa, and kind of communicated to Hezbollah, "Oh, you got us. Soldiers are wounded. They're being medevaced to the hospital." No one was injured. It took a few hours, and by that point, Nasrallah felt like he had done something. Israel felt like this, and we kind of were able to close the chapter. And I remembered that moment, and it stuck with me. It's like, this is so strange. Like, look at what we're doing to fool them that they feel that they did something, but they didn't really do something, and we're helicoptering people, putting ketchup on them or whatever it is, fake blood. I mean, this is what the most powerful military in the Middle East does. This is crazy. And also, it's a one-trick pony. You can't keep doing this over and over again.
You can't do that again. Now, there's an element here. There's always an element here that, or at least there was. We thought there was, right? It's as much about signaling to your own publics, but the leaders don't really want to go into a conflict. And Hamas was deterred. And I can tell you, I was in the system for years, and you advised. You advised Naftali Bennett in different previous positions, so I'm sure you saw the decision making. You're right, though. We let ourselves be fooled into being deterred. We wanted to believe that Hamas was deterrable, and in many ways, we kind of based it on the Hezbollah model, where Hezbollah was deterred in a lot of ways since 2006. And so there's always this dance that you have to play in the Middle East, where you pretend to do something, you say one thing for a domestic audience, you do one thing, then there's maybe messages being exchanged between interlocutors to actually prevent escalation because one side doesn't actually want it. And we thought we were playing that game with Hamas, right? And that's a problem.
I don't want to make it sound light, but it was a game, because ultimately the lesson of October 7th, and this speaks to what you were saying, Avi, is that if you have an enemy on your border with genocidal intention and ambition, you can't play that game, right? That enemy needs to be eliminated as much as possible, degrade as much possible, whatever term you want to use, but you cannot allow that situation to exist. And I mean, everyone's very hyper-focused on Hamas and in Gaza. We abandoned, let's think about this for a moment, those kibbutzim in the south, that they had to live like that. We abandoned, as a country, the communities in the north that lived in an area where, if Hezbollah wanted, they could have invaded and conquered that part of Israel and held on to it for a period of time. We would have won it back 100%, but they could have caused even much more damage and massacre to Israeli society. So that was an abandonment by consecutive Israeli governments. That has to be said, and it has to be recognized. And that's what ties back into the bigger question of, we as a country need to understand how we got into this and where it comes from, and how do we avoid this from happening again, because it will happen again, because there's something very simple here. The reality is, Israelis want a good life. They want to live peacefully. They want to live quietly, but we live in a very terrible, dangerous neighborhood, right? And that requires you to do things differently.
You can't do that again. Now, there's an element here. There's always an element here that, or at least there was. We thought there was, right? It's as much about signaling to your own publics, but the leaders don't really want to go into a conflict. And Hamas was deterred. And I can tell you, I was in the system for years, and you advised. You advised Naftali Bennett in different previous positions, so I'm sure you saw the decision making. You're right, though. We let ourselves be fooled into being deterred. We wanted to believe that Hamas was deterrable. And in many ways, we kind of based it on the Hezbollah model, where Hezbollah was deterred in a lot of ways since 2006. And so there's always this dance that you have to play in the Middle East, where you pretend to do something, you say one thing for a domestic audience, you do one thing, then there's, maybe messages being exchanged between interlocutors to actually prevent escalation because one side doesn't actually want it. And we thought we were playing that game with Hamas, right? And that's a problem.
I think Israel is a country in deep trauma. I think we were in the trauma before October 7th. We just didn't know it. It was a result of political instability, political polarization and division. We had been through 5 elections in the span of 3.5 years. We had just undergone, people kind of poo-pooed that, but that was real, right? We now understand where this all came from. The year of judicial reform ripped us apart to an even greater extent, probably in the worst way that we know, on a domestic civil society issue. And then comes October 7th. Like, that was the starting point of the country. So it's not like everything was hunky-dory, great, united, strong, resilient, and then we go off to war. No, we're ripped apart, we're disenfranchised, we're fighting on the streets with one another. Our Saturday Night Live TV show version is talking about, how we should go down and just fight in our flip-flops, right? That was kind of the language that people were using. I mean, it was a bad time for the state of Israel. And then this happens. And then right away, what ultimately happens is you throw all that to the side, you run to fight as a country, as soldiers, reservists, people, just random, your regular average person. What can I do? How can I support the war effort? In a beautiful way, by the way. And for a time, it seemed that, all that other stuff gone. We're back to who we were. We have that Israeli spirit, and we have that unity is back, is our main theme. But as we've seen, Dan, that disintegrates over time because it wasn't real. It was a patch. It was a Band-Aid to a gunshot wound. And that trauma was just compounded by what happened on October 7th. I mean, you mentioned the number of people. I mean, I moved to Israel 30-something years ago. You would see occasionally someone without a limb, right? Older, in 60s, 70s. It was rare. And you would say, "Oh, that's the Yom Kippur War," right? Not so many people. You have dozens of people everywhere you go. I mean, and not just that. I mean, just real. There's real wounds. There's many people who this war has changed. There's communities that have not gone back to. So we spoke about the North before. Take Kiryat Shmona. Out of a 24,000 population, there's only I think 16,000 people who live there now. They're missing 8,000 people who have just refused to go back, right? Not to mention the ravaging of the communities down south, which are still, need a major rehabilitation. So, and the PTSD is the silent illness, which is everywhere. I mean, it's yeah. And to the credit of the government and the defense ministry, they've recognized this. They've made it much easier for soldiers and reservists to get help if they need it and when they need it, as opposed to the way it used to be. But my point with all of this is just to say we need a healing. Now, part of that healing was able to start with the final return of the 20 living hostages. I think, like, obviously, those people walked out of Gaza in October, and that was a moment that I think all of us probably didn't believe would actually happen, but it did. I think we were in the trauma before October 7th. We just didn't know it. It was a result of political instability, political polarization and division. We had been through 5 elections in the span of 3.5 years. We had just undergone, people kind of poo-pooed that, but that was real, right? We now understand where this all came from. The year of judicial reform ripped us apart to an even greater extent, probably in the worst way that we know, on a domestic civil society issue. And then comes October 7th. Like, that was the starting point of the country. So it's not like everything was hunky-dory, great, united, strong, resilient, and then we go off to war. No, we're ripped apart, we're disenfranchised, we're fighting on the streets with one another. Our Saturday Night Live TV show version is talking about, how we should go down and just fight in our flip-flops, right? That was kind of the language that people were using. I mean, it was a bad time for the state of Israel. And then this happens. And then right away, what ultimately happens is you throw all that to the side, you run to fight as a country, as soldiers, reservists, people, just random, your regular average person. What can I do? How can I support the war effort? In a beautiful way, by the way. And for a time, it seemed that, all that other stuff gone. We're back to who we were. We have that Israeli spirit, and we have that unity is back, is our main theme. But as we've seen, Dan, that disintegrates over time because it wasn't real. It was a patch. It was a Band-Aid to a gunshot wound. And that trauma was just compounded by what happened on October 7th. I mean, you mentioned the number of people. I mean, I moved to Israel 30-something years ago. You would see occasionally someone without a limb, right? Older, in 60s, 70s. It was rare. And you would say, oh, that the Yom Kippur War, right? Not so many people. You have dozens of people everywhere you go. I mean, and not just that. I mean, just real. There's real wounds. There's many people who this war has changed. There's communities that have not gone back to. So we spoke about the North before. Take Kiryat Shmona. Out of a 24,000 population, there's only I think 16,000 people who live there now. They're missing 8,000 people who have just refused to go back. Right. Not to mention the ravaging of the communities down south, which are still need a major rehabilitation. So, and the PTSD is the silent illness, which is everywhere. I mean, to the credit of the government and the defense ministry, they've recognized this. They've made it much easier for soldiers and reservists to get help if they need it and when they need it, as opposed to the way it used to be. But my point with all of this is just to say, we need a healing. Now, part of that healing was able to start with the final return of the 20 living hostages. I think, obviously, those people walked out of Gaza in October, and that was a moment that I think all of us probably didn't believe would actually happen, but it did. Right. That all of them would be released by Hamas. Yeah. No, if we spoke a year ago, we would have probably said some will be lost forever. We'll never get them back. Hamas will never release them. That itself, so that moment, okay, so we can close this chapter. But now, what do we do about the healing? And here's the good news and the bad news. Okay, the good news is that I think it started. I think that Israelis have understood that they need to change the way things are. That we can't just go back to that old way of doing things. That something has to be different. It has to be different in the way we perceive our threats. It has to be different in the way we engage with one another and speak to one another. Some of that is changing. But at the same time, with the end of the war, we're now entering the year of elections, okay? Because you have to have an election in Israel by October of 2026. Yeah, correct. So this is when elections have to be held, and therefore, the politicians, their interest, and we spoke about this before, guys, right? Is go to the extremes, pull people that way. That's where the politicians are, and that's what they're doing. So instead of saying, let's do the right thing, let's unite the people, let's bring people together, the politicians, because of the elections, are pulling us apart once again. And that's what has me concerned this year, that we these now, 8 months ahead until the election.
Can I ask you about this? Because when I visited Israel a few months ago, and it was before the return of the remaining hostages, the living, and the remnants of the ones who were killed by Hamas. But there were a lot of protests. A lot of those protests were about the return of the hostages, and there was a consensus that I felt about the support of the IDF. And that was just two things where the people in Israel were united. Obviously, the polarization is very stark, and it's similar to what's happening here in the U.S. It's very unfortunate, right? Especially when the country is at war on multiple fronts. But I just saw that very recently, now that we're dealing with the Iran threat, with the potential war with Iran, or whatever that's gonna happen there, that even Yair Lapid made a statement about working with Prime Minister Netanyahu's government now, since there could be, if in case of war, right? And I was like, oh wow, there's a glimmer of hope there. Okay, you see different parties are coming together, which usually are very against each other, especially Lapid and Prime Minister Netanyahu. So I was like, oh, okay, that's a positive thing. I haven't seen that in a while. So what do you think of that?
I mean, look, I think that Israelis want to the country has that division internally, and still very much looks at what's to come through the prism still of Netanyahu yes, Netanyahu no, which is how we've been going to vote on issues since then. It has to be said that with the failures that I think rest at Netanyahu's feet that led to October 7th, there's also the credit that he deserves for the re-engineering of the Middle East, the changing of reality here, which is very real, the downfall of Assad, and we speak plenty of with the reality in Syria.
I'll tell you, my mom loves Prime Minister Netanyahu. Like, I'm just gonna tell you that he's popular amongst a lot of
Exactly.
people.
By the way, you talk to Lebanese,
Popular in Lebanon. Yeah.
they love him. I mean,
He's very popular. And
I talk to Lebanese friends, they're like, "Listen, we read what you and your friends write, we'll take Netanyahu. We like him more."
right, there are songs for Abu Yair, you know, like that obviously like being Arabic.
No, it's true. So, I mean, but even putting the joking aside, he has changed the Middle East in a very positive way. Israel today is safer and more secure than it was on the eve of October 7th. Now, how does that translate though into politics? There's an interesting phenomenon here, which I don't have a good explanation. I'm curious what you think, Dan, right?
Let's yeah.
Why is it that when we look at like the kind of lineup of people who are running for office, the heads of parties, you don't see a single new person pretty much. It's people who have already been there. By the way, I mean, there's an issue about women. You don't have a single female head of a party, but put that.
You haven't since Tzipi Livni, right?
Well, right. I mean, you had Merav Michaeli for a period of time, but that was a big flop. But I mean,
Yes.
you don't really. There's no one right now yet who's running, and this is a country that has a history of very senior, prominent. We had Golda Meir. I mean, we've had senior ministers, but I even put that aside. Where are the new people? And so to your point, Javi, I just think that
What's your take on that?
so I don't, it baffles me, to be honest. I think that it has to do with people are afraid to throw their hat in the ring. I think that they look at politics and they say, it's a dirty business. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people I speak to who would like to, who toy with the idea, but say, you know what, let's wait till the day after Netanyahu. So it could be there's a lot of people who are just waiting for that day, which is just never coming, or may never come. But I don't know, but it's a little, to me, it's surprising for a country that is so innovative and creative and dynamic. And I think that there's also something about Israelis, by the way, right? I think Israeli people, because think how we vote. If you look at what's the issue that we vote on security. We have a cost of living that's through the roof. We're paying so much more money for almost everything than what's being paid in Europe or in the United States and elsewhere. And part of this is a lot of it's taxes, right? A lot of it is unions, and it's ridiculous. And everyone loves to complain and kvetch about it, but no Israeli is going to vote because of that. They're going to vote because who's going to take on Iran, and who's going to keep us safe from Syria, and who's going to take
And there's so much irony in that.
establishment of a Palestinian state.
There's so much irony in that, and I'll give you my take. First of all, I think part of it is because politics here is so messy. It's so cutthroat. It's such a backstabbing endeavor, and so it's become, in certain parties, like you said, people are waiting for Netanyahu. On the right, or any party associated with Netanyahu, for all his successes, I've never been a always Netanyahu, and I've also been a never Netanyahu guy. I try to always look at the successes and failures. One of the things that, partly why he's managed to survive for so long is because he prevents anyone from coming up through the ranks. Anyone who was sort of a protege that comes up through the ranks within the Netanyahu sphere gets knocked out of the orbit pretty quickly. You saw that with Bennett, you saw that with Kahlon, you saw that with Barkat. You see this with people who have come up in his sphere. I hate to say that I think in certain parties here, there's also been a lot of cronyism and yes men, some yes women, as opposed to actual people with good ideas or merit to their credit, and a lot of very good Israelis who do toy with it, who say, what, I can make more of an impact outside of politics. I'll say to another point is, and I've been listening lately. If you listen to Yonatan Adiri, I'm sure you listen to him sometimes, and we're going to have him on the show in a few weeks as well. He has a very interesting theory that could ring true here, in that we kind of need a reset to the politics, and maybe October 7th, maybe it's a generational thing that we're getting to a point where we realize what we have right now is failing, and we need to kind of reset the entire system and get in not just an injection of new blood, but entirely new ideas. We had Einat Wilf on the show a few weeks back. And by the way, she is running and she's going to launch a party. I have a hard time seeing her taking more than, maybe joining an existing coalition. We need a redefinition. And you mentioned, it was kind of the last point before I let you talk again, because you're the guest here. Israelis vote on security. I'm going to disagree with that, because I don't think they do. And I did an interesting series of articles and lectures and analysis over the last 5 elections. And my big conclusion is that we essentially have 4 rights and 4 lefts, or 4 issues of right and left in Israel. Right? We have it's not even security, because you can't say security, because if you listen to interviews with Yair Golan, the leader of the far left, if you listen to interviews with Yair Lapid and others, people from the center, people from the center right, nobody has really different ideas on how to deal with Iran, with Hezbollah, with Hamas, etc. Right? And so the big issue is, what do we do with?
And by the way, no one really has a different policy either.
Correct. Right. So what do we do with Judea and Samaria / two-state solution? Yes or no? The other one is religion and state. And that has been an issue here and there. And here you see Lieberman kind of going against the ultra-Orthodox. How much, is that going to be an issue? And by the way, this might be the next defining issue about the ultra-Orthodox, refusing to serve in the military. Economics traditionally is not an issue, and I think it should be more. And you mentioned the incredibly high taxes. And we had the one, the cottage cheese protest back in 2012, 13, I believe, when Yair Lapid, 2011, when Yair Lapid came to power. And then the last issue that became the last election cycles, it was Netanyahu, yes or no, but I think it was really a referendum on populist kind of democracy, will of the majority, with the undertone of there's a deep state, versus we need institutions to safeguard Israeli society from being overtaken by this, I'll exaggerate the position, by this uneducated mob who will abuse the powers of democracy. And that was really kind of the judicial protest. So the question is, first of all, I'm curious your take on that, but what are we going to be voting about this time?
No, I think you mapped out correctly the issues, right? I think that the ultra-Orthodox draft law is probably the lightning rod right now in this moment. But at the end of the day, when people are going to go to the polls, they're going to be asking themselves a question that is bigger than just the ultra-Orthodox issue. Like, I would argue this, and I said this to someone the other day, and they were arguing with me. And then some pollster who you and I both know, Shmuel Rosner, said, no, Yakov is right. And my claim is that if Naftali Bennett, who's the main contender against Bibi, right, in this election, if he can pull together a coalition and the ultra-Orthodox come to him and say, listen, Bennett, we'll sit with you, but you have to give us X, Y, Z in terms of exemption and draft, etc. I said, Bennett will give it to him. And somebody was saying to me, no way, he can't, he'll violate. I said, no, you have to understand. And his voters will accept it also, because for them, the animosity to Bibi is greater than the hostility towards the ultra-Orthodox. They would rather see Bibi go than the issue of ultra-Orthodox draft be solved. You ask me my opinion, I want to see issues solved. So I'm actually, in a crazy way, with all my criticism of Bibi, I would say I would want to see a government, if there's no alternative, different option, I want to see a government that includes Netanyahu and Bennett and Lapid and Gantz and Eisenkot and Lieberman all sit together, no one on the extreme, none of the ultra-Orthodox, no one on the far left, no one on the far right, and get, pardon my language, get shit done, right? Deal with the big issues that we have. Draft the ultra-Orthodox, deal with the economic reform, decide on judicial reform. This is a government that can pass a constitution. It's a government that can really get done what needs to happen in this country. But unfortunately, we're stuck still in the sandbox, dealing with the petty issues. And what I just said, which everyone says, you know what, you're right, we should have policy, and it should be about the policy, it should be what's in the interest of people. People don't vote that way. We're still very tribal, right? We're still very, it's because I think Israelis as a people are still, Hayvi comes from Syria. They're like, it's a country that's split up into, I don't know, 5 different sections. You got the Alawites, you got the Sunnis, you got the Kurds, you got the Druze, right? You got something. Okay, Israel kind of has that too. We have the Ashkenazi elite, we have the Mizrahim, we have the ultra-Orthodox, we have the Israeli Arabs. It was Reuven Rivlin who spoke about the tribes of Israel, right? And the former president. I think it's still very true. And people vote out of that tribalism sentiment more than anything else.
But they don't. It'd be easier if they did, but they don't because you're talking about, how when we talk about the ultra orthodox, right, the refusal to serve, the refusal to really pick up their aspect of the economy, you would think the rest of the country would do exactly what you just said, and yet you see that time and again not happening, right? You see people coalescing around individuals
Yeah,
as opposed
but
to
no,
ideas.
but they coalesce around the individual and the ideology that they think it represents, right? Likud voters, for example, you talk to them and you ask them, how can you vote for somebody who is continuously, I mean, here, best example, take Kiryat Shmona. We just spoke about them, right? Battered during the war, evacuated during the war, 8,000 people missing, now 16,000 people. I'll put money down right now that in the next election, because if you look at how they voted, and I just checked it the other day, the largest party that gets votes in Kiryat Shmona is Likud, okay? It's a periphery, it's a development town, it's on the border, it's always gonna get that's the, Mizrahi, Sephardic community. They're gonna vote for Likud. That's what it's always been. I bet you, even after everything we've just said, they've been let down by this government, abandoned. They will still vote for Likud. Now say to yourself, how does that make sense? Why would they vote for the same guy who has cheated them every single time? Why would people in Sderot, the community, the town on the Gaza border most associated with the Hamas rocket attacks, battered, beaten, they were infiltrated. You look at how they vote always, 70%, 65%, they vote Likud. In this upcoming election, after everything they've been through, October 7th, they're still going to vote Likud. Now ask yourself why. And I think that that's where it comes down to those currents that were there for now 50, 60, 70 years of ethnicity and discrimination and the center versus the center of the country versus the periphery of the country, the Ashkenazim versus the Sephardim, the religious and the secular. It's still there. It's all still under the surface. It's never really been dealt with.
And I'm curious about now that we have this potential war. Again, the Islamic Republic regime, of course, we know that Hezbollah said that if anything happens against the regime in Tehran, that's a war on Hezbollah, of course. We've already known that. But they're in a weaker position. Do you think this is something that is impacting Israeli politics currently? And what is your view on this direction? I mean, if we can go to shifting to the foreign policy aspect.
Look, I think potential impact on elections depends obviously how this all plays out, right? If Iran, for example, if there's regime change, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen, but if there is a regime change, if there's a big blow to military strike by the United States and then also Israel, Iran is further weakened, Iran's programs, ballistic missiles and nuclear further degraded. That is something that Netanyahu will hold up high in the campaign that he is going to be embarking on very soon ahead of the election. So definitely could help him. If, for example, there's a deal and it's a bad deal and it's JCPOA 2.0, and now this is just Trump's bad deal as opposed to Obama's bad deal, Bibi will have his hands tied and won't really be able to fight it because you can't. I mean, first of all, he's not going to go to Congress and speak against Donald Trump. You don't do that, right? You don't live a day to do that. He doesn't have, the Democrats don't like him. The Republicans are going to stand with their president. So his hands and options are severely limited, but the opposition could use this to say, I mean, here's, guys, look, Bibi failed on October 7th. Look at this so-called total victory he promised Israel. The total victory that he promised Israel is Hamas in control of 50% of the Gaza Strip. That's total victory, right? 47%, sorry. I gave them an extra 3%. Yes. I was never good at math. But I mean, so it's the and that people who go through the Rafah crossing are getting a stamp of a state of Palestine, and the logo of the new Palestinian Technocratic Government Committee is the logo of the Palestinian Authority. He promised all this wouldn't happen. It's happened. And then Iran, well, fine, but these were promises that he made. And then on Iran, he promised we're going to stop them. And now they get a nuclear deal that let's say, by the way, let's even say it's a good deal. We all could agree it's a good deal. But you know what? It allows them to keep enriching uranium to 2%, okay? Which doesn't do anything.
But you really think all of these things will happen? Like, we know that Hamas already lost more than 50% of Gaza, and we don't Well, yeah, and 47%, like you just said. And that also will be, I mean, I think as we are, seeing and witnessing history, it will change. Things will. I do too. I mean, I'm more on the optimistic side, so like hear me out though. Now, with the Islamic Republic regime, I'm surprised that you're saying you don't expect that there's going to be a war or, strikes against the regime that will weaken it to be eventually toppled. I actually still think that this is a big possibility. I would be curious to hear why you think that wouldn't happen. So I'm just what I'm saying, and you already talked about the change that has happened in the Middle East, which is very true. In terms of all of this Islamic Republic regime's access has been completely weakened to an unprecedented level, and it's felt across the region. So if we are continuing to witness these things, and if they do happen in the way I'm kind of putting out there, do you think that would make him has fulfilled his promises and make him in a more powerful position?
We've seen this play itself out enough times now to understand how the Trump strategy works. He has amassed a massive military presence here in the Arabian Persian Gulf, whatever you want to call it, right? It is huge, it is unprecedented to some extent. Okay, it seems they're locked and loaded and ready to act. But what Trump does is he prepares that and says, okay, come to the table. Now, if the Iranians, they're at the table now. Now, if a deal doesn't happen, and this is part of what Bibi's talking to him about, Bibi has 3 items, sorry, to speak to the president about. One is, what is the deal that might be going to include? Is it just nuclear? Israel wants to see nuclear ballistic missiles and support of terrorist proxies. Let's talk about what that looks like. Let's talk about what nuclear would look like. Does it allow enrichment? Does it not allow enrichment? There's a lot of elements to talk about. Number 2 is, what's the timeline for this? So if I go back to the June war, right? Trump gave them 60 days. Israel attacked on day 60, right? The day after. When it expired, that's when Israel.
Was the attack dog kept on a leash, right? It was
No,
the
no,
threat.
100%. But I'm saying,
Yeah.
but that Trump allowed that attack to take place. Deadline had been missed. So it was first, again, priority 1, negotiate, make a deal. If that deal is missed, we're ready. And the Iranians would make a mistake, by the way, to miss this opportunity for a deal, in my opinion, because Trump will act, right? But there's a good chance they will make a deal. And that seems to maybe be now the center of gravity has moved to the negotiating table from the USS Lincoln to the negotiating table. It could change back. So, but we don't yet know what the timeline is going to look like. And therefore, I definitely think that's a possibility. And here's the other side to add to it. If a deal is reached, even if it's a terrible deal, Trump will praise it as the best deal ever, and Netanyahu will have to praise it as the best deal ever. Right? He won't be able to go out against it.
Be able to
won't
work
be able to
against
go
them like you did with the JCPOA. And I remember the JCPOA, the problem that we had, and it was an Obama administration, right? So Netanyahu could push back on it. The problem we had is that it originally said Iran will never get a deal, nukes, missiles, proxies, and by the end of it, the Obama team caved in on a sunset clause on the nukes, which made it basically meaningless. No pressure on the missiles, no pressure on the proxies. And I'm concerned. I'm concerned that this is exactly what's going to happen again, because Trump will fall into the American trap of saying, well, this is really far from us.
Correct. No, and I can't. I've dealt with it. I solved it. It's not an issue anymore. We staved off war in the Middle East. That's on Iran. On Gaza, I mean, look, I am optimistic, by the way, about Gaza. I think that there is a real opportunity for amazing change. And I'll tell you why, by the way, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because Hamas is weakened. I'm optimistic because Israel has changed its whole approach, the policy of containment out the window. We will not, hopefully, ever allow this to happen again. But also, and just as important, because for the first time ever, the Arab world and the Western world are taking responsibility for the Gaza Strip in a way that we've never seen before. And that's a big deal, right? Now, will that last? You got the UAE and Egypt and the Saudis and Indonesia and all these other countries that are involved. Now, we don't like Turkey and Qatar, but I mean, for the first time, you have all these countries that are actually saying, we want to help this situation. You have America involved. You got the board of peace, however that's going to play out. So that's a big deal. But Hamas has 30,000+ fighters who are armed and are not giving up their weapons. And they are in control of not 50, 47% of the Gaza Strip, and they are making money, and they are confiscating goods, and they are taxing them. They're not just going to disappear, and as long as they're there, it just means that the countdown to another clash with them is going to happen. Now, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, maybe there is some solution, but we can't pretend that this has been solved. It has not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Khalid Mashal, the head of Hamas now at the Al Jazeera conference, I don't know if you know, the Al Jazeera conference, basically also said, we're not going to disarm so long as Israel's there until we destroy Israel. And so, it's you're right, and I've been saying it as well, that it's a major achievement that we've got the whole Arab world supposedly on our side here. The problem that we're going to run into, and we're certainly not going to solve it on this podcast, is no Hamas won't disarm, and nobody wants to make it disarm. And so this is just going to, we have opportunities that we've never had before. But here, my concern is that you're going to have pressure from the Americans and the Arabs on Israel not to do anything meaningful, and they won't do anything meaningful. And so it'll just get us back to square one, even if it just pushes it back by 5 or 10 years or whatever it has. We have about just a time for another maybe last question with you, and I'm going to sneak in a question because you're from the Chicago area, and I'm also from the Chicago area, so I'll save that one for last. But in the coming months, I don't ask you to predict the elections because Israeli elections are um, notoriously unpredictable. But as you said, there's nothing new to really expect. But what are kind of the big lines that we should be expecting? Maybe narratives, issues we vote on, mergers we couldn't expect. I'm not expecting any new figures, but what are kind of the big things that people should be looking for in the coming months up to these elections?
Well, I would wait to see. I mean, we haven't. There's going to be other people running, and there will be other parties, and I think it's important. I think definitely we'll see a satellite party on the right. There is room for somebody to come in and take back some of the votes that Netanyahu lost to the opposition, try to bring them back, and someone who can potentially also sit with Netanyahu. So that's something that I would expect to see.
Such as who? Or have you heard any rumors?
Ofer Winter is often referred to as somebody who could be in that role. I think you probably, cross paths with him back in your days in uniform as well. He's a brigadier general, was in his last role.
Wiener. Erez Wiener?
Ofer Winter.
Ofer Winter.
Ofer Winter was the commander of the Givati Brigade.
Yes.
And then was the military secretary to the defense minister for a period of time. He was the commander of Givati back in 2014 during Operation Protective Edge. He's seen as like a guy with a knife between his teeth, real fighter, talks straight shooter. He can pull right wing, he can pull centrist, he can pull a lot of the religious. He's somebody who's almost definitely going to run. So I think let's wait to see what else is coming. And I would also expect, yes, that there will be some merger still in the opposition. Gadi Eisenkot, the former chief of staff, man who really lost a son, lost 2 nephews in this war. He's not going to, I don't think, run in the end all the way by himself. He'll merge with either Bennett or Lapid, and maybe that will lead even to a bigger merger. But I think that ultimately, the thing that I want to see is I really would like to see conversations about vision and about policy and substance. And, right now, the whole conversation is about, will I sit with the Arabs? Will I not sit with the Arabs? Will I sit with Netanyahu? Will I not sit with Netanyahu? And what Israelis, I fear, and I don't want to say this is like, I don't want to be patronizing to people, but like what I think we're missing is that we're stuck in the mud. We're dealing with with what's not important. And it's cool to talk about, oh yeah, they shouldn't, but it's not real. That's not what impacts our lives, right? Like I could give you a whole lecture right now why having a coalition with Arab parties is the epitome of is Zionism, right? That's what it's about, right? And
If they agree that Israel is a Jewish state and they're okay with it, then yes.
and we should want that to happen. I mean, that should be something we strive for. But right now, everyone's saying, no, God forbid we should ever do that. I mean, so I think that we're stuck in the stupid details as opposed to really saying, okay, what do you want to do with this country? Where do you want us? We have our, and I'll leave you with this. In 2 years from now, assuming whatever government's elected in the end, It'll take office probably in the beginning of 2027. May of 28, we're going to be celebrating our or April of 28, we'll be celebrating our 80th anniversary as a country. That's a milestone, right? And it's a question of who are we going to be and where are we going to be as a country in that moment? And that's something that I would like to hear more talk about in that sense.
Wow.
Very cool. So so you're a native Chicagoan,
And you're from Indiana.
and I grew up in northern Indiana, closer to Chicago than Indianapolis. How do you feel about the Bears this last year?
You know, so it's a little embarrassing. I don't follow that closely. However,
All right, we'll have to.
because of how they did so good, I did get a little back into it, and I did watch a couple of the games, and wow, I mean, impressive. Like it was not the team that I grew up on. That much I can tell you. But yes, I'll tell you one thing that I'm proud of is my son, 13. He was actually born a year we were in Boston, but otherwise grew up totally in Israel. Every year, stays up, watches the Super Bowl, right? So we got something in there.
There you go.
The small wins in life.
Yeah, this year's Super Bowl definitely took a lot of attention, and like even the kind of the halftime.
Oh yeah.
You guys are probably aware of all of the controversy.
I watched it. I stayed up.
Was-
Oh yeah.
I thought it was cool, but I mean, yeah.
I didn't think it was a good show. I hate that you can't have an opinion on the show without being called a racist. It's like, no, you don't wanna I don't care if it was in Spanish or not. I don't think it was a good show.
I don't like his music. My kids had been playing this guy, and I'm like, wait, who is this Bad Bunny guy? And then they're like, his music. We were playing. It's not my style. I mean, what can I say? So
It's okay, and I think it's fine. I mean, the whole idea for me, it's like when I saw the American flag and then all the flags of like Latin American countries, I was like, okay, well, this is kind of like a relationship, kind of like the U.S. role and like friendship and closeness with these countries that share the American continent. It's okay. I mean, that is my 2 cents, but I know it became such a like high focus.
NSL Corporation wanting to branch into new markets. That's really it. It's not. That's
100%. Yeah.
it's really it. People just want new markets.
Then it's branch into there's a lot going on there. Yeah.
So,
Thank you guys.
that was
Yakov Katz, Jewish People Policy Institute, Mead co-founder or founder or chair and former longtime editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Just all-around good guy, Yakov Katz. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Food for thought today. Please, everyone, follow us on X, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube. And, of course, on your favorite podcast app. Give us the best rating. And check our website because we have live feeds of our news on our website and our newsletter at www.middleeast24.org. And, yeah, stay tuned for our next podcast next week on Middle East Breakdown.